Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
The wife wrote down some notes in the diary and the husband noticed it, and soon opened it. Having read it, he was shocked to see. Today's story has a subplot. Enjoy watching it. It was almost 6 o'clock in the evening when Patrick Dunn finally made it home. Wednesday night, he had worked an extra hour and a half to finish the wiring work that Wayne Fall, his boss, had assigned him that morning. By staying at work, he was able to complete the task almost half a day earlier than expected. I must say he worked like hell all day and felt it in his aching muscles. It was almost a good thing that his wife Glenda had left that morning for 3 days of seminars in Columbus. He had initially offered to take the day off and accompany her on the trip, but she insisted that he stay, reminding him that they were going on a cruise during spring break. They already had tickets, and he had already booked a vacation for that trip. The tickets were displayed prominently on the middle shelf of their sideboard so they could see them every time they looked into the dining room. Patrick was a little surprised that there was no message on the answering machine confirming that she had arrived safely. She had decided to make the 3-hour drive instead of taking one of the local flights, which was also an option. If you remembered correctly, registration started at 7 in the evening, so he decided to call her and press the speed dial button on the wall phone to contact her cell phone. The phone rang only twice before she answered. "I was just about to call you, Patrick. You must be reading my mind," she said, sounding happy, and he could hear the crowd buzzing around her as she spoke. He wasn't surprised that she knew who was calling, since caller ID would have shown that the call was from a home phone. "You know that I could always read your thoughts, dear. So, you arrived safely? How was the journey? I hope you still have all your wings intact." He laughed loudly, knowing her first words in response would be to defend her driving skills. He could imagine the look of annoyance on her pretty face and knew that if they were face to face, she would stick out her tongue to show what she thought about his question. The fact that it was January and there was a chance of light snow made him a little worried about her car ride. He would have preferred she took the flight, but he was glad she answered so quickly. She laughed before answering, "Of course it's okay. The trip went smoothly, traffic was light, and I had no problem finding the Sheraton Hotel. That map you printed off the internet was a big help. Honey, you know I'll do anything for you." "Nothing's too good for my Glenda," he said. "In fact, I spoke to the boss this morning, and he willingly agreed to give me some time off so I could join you here." "No, you're not coming here," she replied quickly, her voice rising an octave higher. She paused for a moment and continued more calmly, "We've already talked about this, Patrick. You know I want to wait until spring break so we can go somewhere together." "Yes, I know. I'm just teasing you, Glenda." "I haven't talked to him about the vacation," he said. This had been his intended answer even before her outright refusal, but it bothered him that she had rejected the idea so forcefully. "I'll stay home like a good boy and do what I'm told." He laughed after these words since he usually did not allow her to get her way so easily. He felt the relief in her voice when she said, "I'm glad to hear that, Patrick. These days will be boring, and I've already decided on a busy seminar schedule. We wouldn't have much time to spend together while I'm here. You said I must have read your mind. Glenda, was there something you wanted to talk to me about?" "Oh, good thing you reminded me. I can't find my travel bag, you know, the one with my sewing kit and lint brush and everything. I was sure I packed it. You can check in the bedroom. Did I leave it there? Maybe it's in the trunk of the car if you don't find it in the bedroom." "Of course, dear. Wait a minute, I'll get the portable phone in the bedroom." He set the phone down on the kitchen table and quickly headed upstairs to their bedroom. As soon as he entered the room, he noticed the bag she was looking for on the corner of the chest of drawers. He picked up the portable phone and said, "Problem solved. The bag you're looking for is right here on the dresser. You'll just have to be careful not to lose the buttons and stay away from the lint." He laughed. "Oh, thank God it's there. I wouldn't want to go into the garage and look for it. There's a little store in the hotel lobby, and I can buy whatever I need there." She hesitated a bit before continuing, "I have to go now, honey. They open the front desk early, and I'm third in line." She quickly added, "I probably won't be calling much this week since I have a presentation scheduled for tomorrow night from 7:30 to 10 p.m., and they have a dinner party scheduled for Friday night." My last seminar is Saturday morning, so I'll go home straight after lunch and be home in time for dinner. Dear, that's okay, honey. I worked longer today and I'll probably do the same on Thursday and Friday as well. Call me if you can, and I'll call you if there's anything important. Anyway, I'll see you at dinner on Saturday. They exchanged a few more pleasantries before ending the conversation. As Patrick returned to the kitchen to hang up the phone, he began to think about Glenda and her reaction to his joke about joining her. She had been acting a little strange the past few months, sometimes too quiet, sometimes trying too hard to please. Even when they first seriously discussed the possibility of him accompanying her on this trip, her reaction was a categorical rejection of the idea. The realization that he was hungry took his mind off Glenda's actions over the past few months, and he decided to order pizza. With almost 40 minutes left until the expected delivery time, he immediately went upstairs to take off his dirty work uniform and take a shower. When he finished, he put on casual jeans and one of his many work t-shirts, all bearing the logo of Anderson Electric, his employer. He was relaxing at the kitchen table, enjoying a beer when his pizza arrived. He knew he should have cooked himself a more nutritious dinner, but being overweight had never been his problem. His work kept him in good shape. Glenda wasn't a big fan of pizza, so he felt comfortable indulging himself while she was gone. He would eat the leftovers the next day, taking them for lunch. Most workplaces had a microwave where he could heat up his food. He spent the next hour watching one of the news programs on TV but soon realized that his attention on the talking head had waned, and he was thinking again about Glenda and her change in behavior over the past 60-odd days. It bothered him that something had changed in her and that she had so categorically rejected his offer to join her on the trip. At 35, Glenda was a real beauty, tall and slender, with long dark hair and dark eyes. She worked as a sociology professor at a local college and had recently been hired at the end of the last school year, a fact she was very proud of. As one of the junior members of the faculty, she had more classes than most, but she mentioned that she was assigned a teaching assistant, or as she called it, a teaching assistant, as the fall semester began. She told him how nice it was that her teaching assistant, a senior who would graduate in the spring, could help her with grading papers and student advising that she had always been responsible for. She mentioned his name was Anthony, but Patrick couldn't remember if he'd ever heard his last name. His name came up a few times in the first couple of months, but she hadn't said anything about him in a long time. In mid-November, she brought up the topic of upcoming seminars she wanted to attend. They were scheduled for the week between New Year's and the start of the second semester. It was considered professional development, and the college covered most of the costs. At first, when he offered to accompany her, she did not object. After 2 weeks, she had already firmly decided that she did not want him to go with her, suggesting instead a trip together for spring break. Reluctantly, he finally agreed to her categorical decision. There was little talk about the workshops at Christmas, and they had a wonderful holiday with family and friends. He noticed several large envelopes containing registration materials, and her registration was quickly sent back. She seemed to be looking forward to the trip and even started packing her suitcase a few days before the new year. However, she was always organized, and this was quite typical for her. A little after 8 o'clock, he returned to their bedroom intending to continue reading the book he had left unfinished on the nightstand. When he saw the bag Glenda had mentioned on the phone, he decided to put it back on the shelf in the closet where it was usually kept. As he picked up the bag, he noticed it was sitting on top of Glenda's diary, a book he thought she usually kept in her briefcase. They had been married for 8 years, but he rarely saw her diary as she always hid it. Once, immediately after the wedding, he jokingly asked her to allow him to read it, but she categorically refused, making it clear that it was for her personal and private use. She described it as her thoughts or memory and said it was meant for her eyes only. They never discussed it again, and in fact, he had only seen her diary open in her hands a couple of times during their 8 years of marriage. Both times, he took her by surprise, and when she saw him, she immediately closed the book and latched the small lock, effectively barring his access. Patrick suspected that she wrote in her diary when she was in her office at college, although she could do it at home while he was at work. Their schedules didn't line up completely. She was usually still home when he left and would be back by the time he finished his shift. Returning the bag to the shelf, he went back to the dresser and picked up the diary, touching it for the first time. The book was about 6 inches by 8 inches and an inch thick. It was covered in red leather and securely closed with a clasp held in place by a small brass lock. Holding the book, Patrick thought it probably contained the secret to Glenda's behavior change over the past few months. Instead of putting the book back on the dresser, he carried it downstairs. Returning to the kitchen, where the light was brighter, he carefully examined the book and its lock. The first thing he noticed was that, when he looked at the top and bottom of the book, only about a third of the pages were used while the rest appeared to be new. His first thought was that this book was likely Glenda's only diary. It was impossible for 8 years of notes to take up only a third of the book. He knew there must be other older volumes. After thinking about it for a couple of minutes, Patrick realized that the only likely place to keep the previous diaries was in Glenda's closet. Each of them had their own closet, and he never entered hers. Even as he thought about it, he headed upstairs to their bedroom. After 5 minutes of careful searching, he found a shoebox on the back of the top shelf and opened it to find a stack of red leather journals. He immediately returned to the kitchen with his discovery. The first thing he noticed was that all the diaries were the same. The ones in the box had a small white circle with a number on the spine, and the 6 books were numbered 1 through 6. The current diary was not numbered. As he examined them, he noticed that the word Coons was embossed on the bottom of the back cover of each diary, which he recognized as the name of a local specialty store. The next thing he noticed was that all 7 locks seemed identical, without any identification numbers or marks. He wondered if they were all opened with the same key. Another thought quickly occurred to him, and he immediately took the telephone directory from the shelf under the phone and found the number for Coons Specialties. It was already 20 minutes to 9, and he wondered if they would still be open. Since many shops in the city center were open late on Wednesdays, he hoped they might be. The phone was answered within 2 rings. Coons Specialties, how may I help you? The voice belonged to a young woman, and she sounded sincere. Hello, I heard that you have a line of red leather journals that are about 6 by 8 inches. Do you know if you have any in stock? I'd like to buy one as a gift. I think I know what book you're talking about. Wait a minute, I'll go check if they're on the shelf. She walked away from the phone for a few minutes before returning and saying, yes, we have 2 in stock. After he learned that the store would be open until 10 in the evening, Patrick quickly went to take a look at the new diary, which he might be able to use to get the small key that would open the others. It was a risky move, but he knew that if he tried to pick the lock, he would probably ruin it, and Glenda would never forgive him for trying to pry into her journals. Half an hour later, Patrick was driving home with one of the red leather diaries and the key in his bag next to him. It was expensive, almost $160, but he didn't care about the price. It was a small price to pay if he could find out what was bothering his wife. He could always give her a new diary for her birthday. He already had suspicions that she might be hiding her illness from him. She had done this once before when tests showed abnormal results, and she was worried alone without sharing it with him. In the end, it didn't turn out to be anything serious, but the thought that she had a mammogram in the fall never left his mind. Another reason for her concern could be conflicts with members of the college faculty. He knew that if she had problems with a colleague, she would never tell him about it. Glenda believed in solving her problems on her own when it came to her work. There was another possibility, of course, that lurked in the back of his mind, and he consciously tried to ignore it, but it kept popping up in his thoughts. What if she was cheating on him? Like any gullible husband, he couldn't admit it to himself and instead focused on other possible explanations. In some ways, they were an unusual couple. He was an inch shorter than her, with short blonde hair and blue eyes. His body was muscular, while she was tall and slender. They had known each other in school and even met several times after high school. They went their separate ways. Patrick began training to become an electrician, and Glenda went to college and graduate school. They met again by chance at the beginning of her final school year when they were both invited to a mutual friend's birthday party. They hit it off immediately and got married a month after she graduated. By then, he was already a master electrician and had recently made a down payment on a small house. This house was their home for the first 5 years of their marriage, but since Glenda was now earning a good salary and Patrick was working full-time, they decided to move to a larger house. They had already discussed the possibility of having a child or 2 and had decided that Glenda would stop taking the pills by the end of the school year. When Patrick returned home, he wasn't entirely sure that the key to the new diary would fit the locks on the diaries he found. The key, kept in a small brown envelope inside the diary box, seemed very small to him. He began to think that perhaps he should have simply asked the salesman if all the locks were the same. He had already decided that if the key didn't work, he would forget about it. If each lock was unique, he wasn't going to waste time searching for hidden keys to Glenda's journals. Anyway, 5 minutes after he walked through the door, he was sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of journals and an open can of Coke in front of him. He had a small key in his right hand and was looking at the 7th diary, the one that contained Glenda's most recent entries. He knew that if he tried this key and it fit, there would be no turning back. He would open the diary and read what she had made clear was intended for her eyes only. He sat there for a few minutes, trying to decide if he wanted to cross that line. He was afraid that he would accidentally reveal to her that he was peeping and she would never trust him again. After all, his concern for her health and the constant unspoken questions in the back of his mind gave him the push he needed to open the lock. The key fit perfectly, turned smoothly, and the lock clicked open. After a few seconds, the book was available for his study, and he opened it to the last page. The top of the page was dated the previous day, and about 3/4 of the page was filled. He quickly began to read the neat handwriting written on the page. It took him a minute to read the lines, and by the time he had finished, he had turned pale. His face had lost all expression, and his eyes had taken on the shiny look that tears give. He slowly stood up, picked up his can of Coke, and walked to the kitchen sink. Standing there and looking out the window, he slowly clutched the can of Coke, apparently not noticing that the drink began to overflow and flow down his hand into the sink. Finally, he noticed his wet and sticky hand, threw the can into the sink, and washed the sticky mixture off his fingers. After drying his hands with a paper towel, he picked up a stack of journals and the key and walked slowly into the living room. He placed a stack of books on the nightstand next to his chair, turned on the lamp above it, and sat down in his favorite chair. Once he was comfortable, he took the 7th diary and opened it to the first page. He had a clear idea of how the story ended. Now he needed to find out how it started. The page he read forever changed his idea of an ideal wife and their ideal life together. He needed to know the details of how this happened, and he hoped the diary would provide them. Instead of reading the events in reverse order, he chose to read them in chronological order. For a while, he considered going straight to the Sharon Hotel, going up to room 412, and talking to his wife. He quickly decided that this would most likely lead to disaster, as he would either become a prime candidate for a traffic accident in his rush to get there or be unable to control himself if he made it there unscathed. His only option would have been to call her, but he was afraid that he would break down when he heard her voice, and he was too proud a man to want to expose himself that way. The top of the first page was dated early June, just over 6 months ago. He began to read carefully, looking for anything that might be relevant to the devastating information Glenda had written on the last page. None of the notes about the summer months contained anything that could help him understand his wife and her plans. There were several mentions of her happiness in life, her husband, and how her career had gone since she was hired. Everything he read was supposed to make him happy and proud, confident in his marriage, but he knew how the story would end when he reached the last page. This knowledge spoiled everything good he had read. In early September, Glenda finally wrote an entry in her diary that related to what Patrick was looking for. He sat down in a chair and reread the relevant part of the entry twice. September, date, Dear Diary, my new assistant came into my office today. He's a little taller than me, maybe an inch or so, and has black hair, dark eyes, and a short, scruffy beard that looks more like an unshaven one. He introduced himself as Anthony Romano and reminds me of someone, maybe a movie star. He left me a printout of his grades and seems quite qualified. Patrick began to read the diary more carefully, looking for any other mention of Anthony Romano, the teaching assistant. The next 2 entries contained nothing but thoughts about her classes and how they were going. She seemed quite content, although perhaps a little nervous about how she would handle one of the larger classes she had. It had over 100 students, and she wondered how she would be able to accommodate that many. September 15th. Dear Diary, Anthony is now helping me with my big class. He answers students' questions when I am busy preparing materials for the lecture. I have noticed that my female students seem very enthusiastic about him. I overheard two of them discussing him as they left class, noting that he looked a lot like Leonardo DiCaprio. That's probably why he seemed familiar to me. As he continued to read, mentions of Anthony Romano became more frequent. Now he read even more carefully, stopping from time to time to reread some passages. September 20th. Dear Diary. Now classes are getting better. Several students dropped out. I think they may have felt that the course would be too difficult for them. I noticed that while I was lecturing, Anthony sat in one of the front rows and seemed to spend all his time watching me. I'll have to give him more work. September 24th. Dear Diary. I had about 3 hours of free time this afternoon and was working on a reading assignment when Anthony came into my office. He stayed to help, and the work moved quickly with both of us making copies and selecting articles to include. The recording continued with a long paragraph in which she mentioned her intention to talk to Patrick about how children could fit into their future. This was the first entry he found that mentioned this topic. September 30th. Dear Diary. I caught Anthony's eye again during the lecture. I frowned at him, and I'm sure he knew what I meant, but he just grinned and continued to watch me. At the end of each class, at least a couple of female students approach him and ask him questions about the lecture. None of them seem to want to come to me for information. I guess they are more interested in him than in me. Overall, my students are doing well, which makes me very happy. It's not that I haven't lectured before, but now that I'm a professor, I feel more pressure to make sure my students succeed. There were several entries in a row with no mention of Anthony, although they showed that her classes seemed to be going very well. In all her entries, she was happy and optimistic and mentioned her determination to talk to Patrick about their plans. He remembered that sometime in the fall, they first talked at length about their common desire to have at least one child. Glenda wanted to finish her first year as a professor without the worries and responsibilities of pregnancy, so they decided to wait until the end of the school year to start trying to get pregnant. October 8th. Dear Diary. I'm so excited. Patrick and I have promised to have children, and I plan to go off the pill as soon as the spring semester ends. I told Anthony about all this, and he seemed very happy for us. We were in my office, and he walked over to where I was sitting at my desk, took my hand, pulled me to my feet, and then hugged me very tightly. He caught me off guard, and when he seemed reluctant to let me go, I had to gently push him away and remind him that my office door was open and anyone could walk by. October 10th. Dear Diary. Anthony came to my office this afternoon, and I have to admit I'm a little worried. I didn't see him come in and didn't realize he was there until I heard the door close and lock. When I looked at him, he smiled and said, "Now no one can pass by and see us." I clearly told him to open the door, and he did. He hung around for about 15 minutes before finally leaving. Now I wonder what he meant when he locked the door. October 11th. Dear Diary. I was preparing questions for a first quiz when Anthony walked in today. He stayed to help, and it really made the job easier. He apologized for closing the door yesterday, and I told him it was okay. When I asked him why he was so interested in me, he replied that he liked the company of mature women much more than girls his age. I told him that I was happily married, but I must admit that I was very flattered by what he said. The idea that he could potentially be more interested in me than some of the younger women at our college fills me with surprise. October 13th. Dear Diary. I expected Anthony to come into my office today, but he didn't. I was a little disappointed because I wanted to talk to him more about what he said about being interested in mature women. October 15th. Dear Diary. There were several students in my office today when Anthony walked in. I hoped you would stick around until the last one left, but he left when I finished discussing essay topics with the last group. October 16th. Dear Diary. Today I finally got the chance to talk to Anthony. He asked if he could close the door so we wouldn't be disturbed, and I agreed. I was able to ask him why he found mature women more interesting, and he said that his first intimate experience was with a 40-year-old widow who lived next door to him. He claims that he finds that girls his age don't know what they want, unlike mature women. I stood leaning against the table, and while he was talking, he came up to me. Before I could think about it, he hugged me. If I ever had any doubts that he found me attractive, he put them to rest. I wanted to show him that I wasn't mad at him, so I let him hold me for almost a minute before I gently pressed myself against him. He immediately let me go but took me by surprise when he leaned forward and kissed me. He then turned and walked out of my office without saying a word. Now I understand that I should have stopped him at that moment and reminded him that I was happily married, but I didn't do this. Now, I constantly replay that moment in my thoughts when I give them free rein. Patrick was concerned because it was clear that Anthony was constantly testing boundaries, and Glenda was not reacting in the way he thought was right. He left the book open on his chair while he went to get a fresh can of Coke. Returning to his chair with the book in his hands, he was ready to continue reading about the apparent seduction of his wife. October 20th. Dear Diary. Late this afternoon, as I was getting ready to leave the office and drive home, Anthony appeared at the door and asked if I was busy. As soon as I said no, he came over and locked the door behind him. He completely ignored my request to open the door and immediately approached me. He took my hands and said that he had been thinking about me constantly for the last 4 days. He said he wanted one more kiss. I told him that I was not a widow looking for a lover and that his pursuing me was wrong. He said he understood but asked for a kiss for his birthday. I thought it would be the easiest way to get rid of him and agreed, but now I regret it. I didn't know what to say, so I apologized for not having a card for his birthday. He grinned and said it was all right, his birthday was in July. I should have been angry at him for deceiving me, but I just couldn't. I laughed at his trick to get a kiss. He thanked me for the wonderful kiss and left my office. I don't know what's happening to me, but I'm afraid that he's starting to influence me. I need to be more careful around him in the future. The next 3 entries did not mention Anthony. Glenda was busy grading a small test she administered to her large class and correcting her students' essays. Patrick thought it was strange that Anthony was not involved in these tasks, but there was no indication in the diary as to why he was not there. October 30th. Dear Diary. For the first time, I don't know how to tell you about my day. I guess I just need to describe what happened. I don't know how I'll be able to deal with Patrick when he gets home because I'm afraid he'll see me and immediately understand everything. It all started when Anthony walked into my office this afternoon. I was busy reading and didn't hear him come in, and his cheerful hello took me by surprise. When I looked up, he was closing and locking my office door. For some reason, I didn't say anything about this. When he came to me, he took my hands and lifted me from the chair. He didn't give me a chance to say a word before he started kissing me. I feel so ashamed. There's no excuse for not stopping it right away. He just smiled and said, "Don't try to say you didn't like it." I didn't say anything, and he said, "I knew it." When I finally found my voice, I told him to leave. He smiled slightly and said that he would see me tomorrow. I realized that I'm not handling the situation with Anthony correctly. He makes it so hard for me, and I'm sure he knows it. Maybe I should talk to Patrick about this, but I just know he won't like the way I've let this play out. The worst part is that I find myself thinking about Anthony from time to time. Patrick read this entry for the 3rd time and realized that he was again so angry that he would lose control if Anthony was in front of him. He never thought he was capable of extreme cruelty until this moment came. November 2nd. Dear Diary. I think I finally stopped worrying about how I'll look in front of Patrick. That first evening was the most difficult. Every time I spoke to Patrick or he looked at me, I was sure that he would understand what happened in my office. At one point, he asked if something was bothering me, since apparently I was acting a little strange. Under pressure, he accepted my denial without question, and I realized how easily I could hide everything from my husband. I hope I never have to do this again. November 6th. Dear Diary. It had been several days since I last saw Anthony alone. He was at a lecture where he was supposed to help me, and I noticed that he was still looking at me. When he catches my eye, he smiles at me, and I'm sure I blushed. For the first time, I'm wondering how I'll cope the next time he comes to my office alone. November 8th. Dear Diary. Anthony walked into my office this afternoon, but several other students were already there. I looked at him as he walked away, and he blew me a kiss and grinned. I'm sure the other students didn't see this since their backs were turned to him, but I wish he would have been more considerate of my situation. I received an invitation to a series of seminars in Columbus just after the new year. It looks interesting, and I think I'll go if I can. I ordered an information pack. November 9th. Dear Diary. Yesterday was another day that's difficult for me to talk about. Once again, I am very unhappy with both Anthony's behavior and my own, and I am wondering how this will all end if I don't do something soon. I had a couple of free hours this morning and was busy when I heard the office door open and close. I don't know how Anthony manages to walk in without me noticing. I asked him to open the door, but he simply ignored me. When he tried to lift me from the chair, I resisted. Unfortunately, my resistance quickly faded as he persisted. I thought, what can one more little kiss do? If only that was all. If I had had the common sense to limit myself to this, it would be easier for me to describe it all. As soon as I regained control of myself, I pushed him away and ran into the bathroom. I had tears in my eyes as I put my clothes in order. All I could think about was how angry Patrick would be if he saw us or ever found out about this. Just as I finished cleaning myself up, Anthony walked through the bathroom door. I think he saw that I was very upset and left immediately after saying that he wouldn't apologize and that he hoped we could do it again. I should have told him not to even think about it, but I was too upset and couldn't speak until he left. What really surprised me was how well I was able to handle myself in front of Patrick when he got home from work. I'm sure he didn't suspect anything, and I find it hard to believe that I didn't feel any pressure when we talked all evening. Last night, we made love, and it was as good as ever. Maybe I was still feeling the effects of my high from the morning, or perhaps I wanted to prove to myself that Anthony couldn't match Patrick in the art of love. Once again, the entire entry was devoted to the episode with Anthony. Patrick, having read it again, felt a wave of anger. Finally, he turned the page and continued reading Glenda's diary. There was no mention of Anthony in the notes all week. Glenda was clearly pleased that the first semester was coming to an end. There were only a couple of weeks left, and she was looking forward to their completion. November 17th. Dear Diary. God, I just don't know what's wrong with me. Anthony has gained a power over me that I could never have imagined. I don't know if it's his tough exterior or some internal flaw in me, but I just can't maintain control around him. This afternoon, he came into my office and sat on the corner of my desk. I told him we needed to talk about what happened the last time he was here, and he quickly agreed. He just watched and smiled while I explained how wrong it was for us to be in any kind of relationship. I reminded him that I was happily married and that my profession might suffer if anyone found out what we had done. While I was talking, he just nodded and smiled. When I finished, I leaned back in my chair, confident that he understood my position. Despite my reasonable approach and confidence that the situation had been resolved, it was not. A few minutes passed, though in reality it was only about 40 seconds, and he asked if I wanted to lock the door myself or if he should do it. I was at a loss for words, and after a short pause, he stood up, closed, and locked my office door. We've entered dangerous territory, and I just don't know what to do about it. A big part of me wants to stop him as my assistant, but another part of me says we didn't do anything that bad. I'll never be able to tell Patrick about this, and luckily there's no way he'll ever find out. My office is on the 4th floor, and there are no buildings that can look in on us. All this happened just an hour ago, and I still feel euphoric. Hopefully, my emotions will be back to normal before I return home to Patrick. This recording was also difficult for Patrick. It was clear that the situation was quickly escalating, and he already felt that he did not know his wife as well as he thought. He had already decided to read all of her diaries, no matter how long it took. He read the 2 pages over and over again. Having finished, he looked at his watch and noticed that it was already 2 a.m. He knew there were still many pages ahead, but he couldn't put the book down. Before continuing, he called the Anderson Electric office and left a voicemail saying he would be taking the next day off for personal reasons. He had not yet made a final decision about what he would do, but he knew that his life had already changed forever. Where there had once been love and dreams of the future, there was now a cold emptiness and growing anger. Before continuing to read the diary, he went to the bathroom to make room for the last can of Coke and then grabbed a fresh can from the kitchen. On his way back to the living room, he didn't feel tired and didn't think it was caused by the caffeine in his drink. His mind was in overdrive, trying to process everything he was reading. He looked at his watch again and was surprised that only 8 hours had passed since he spoke with Glenda. His suspicions were beginning to arise. November 22nd. Dear Diary. Anthony was in the office this afternoon, and I purposely kept the table between us. He didn't insist or try to lock the door. I've felt so guilty these past few days that I couldn't even let him touch me. I think he sensed my determination to keep things on track. I hope I can maintain this firmness. The next few days of recordings contain no mention of Anthony. Glenda was feeling optimistic as the first semester came to an end. There were only a couple of weeks left, and she was looking forward to their completion. November 23rd. Dear Diary. I told Patrick about the workshops, and he was open to me going. He even offered to take some time off to go with me. I'll have to think about this. There might be a few things we could do when I'm not in class. Apparently, Glenda's decision not to have Patrick accompany her to the seminars changed dramatically between November 23rd and mid-December. Patrick continued reading. November 25th. Dear Diary. Anthony stopped me in the hallway this morning and asked if I would reconsider the possibility of him visiting the house. I clearly told him that this would never happen. He especially wanted to know if Patrick had night business trips. His next idea was that I could visit him at the house on 2nd Avenue that he shared with 3 other students. When I told him I would never do that, he said I could always call him if I changed my mind. His name and number were in the phone book. Apart from trying to get me to meet outside of college, he behaved himself. I told him about the seminars I was planning to attend, and he showed great interest in them. I told him they were for teachers only, but he just smiled. November 30th. Dear Diary. Yesterday was another day that will be difficult to write about. I feel like I've completely lost myself. I barely slept last night, and even Patrick seemed to sense that something was wrong. I wish I could explain to him what's on my mind, but it's simply impossible. I've been fantasizing about Anthony several times over the past couple of days. I don't have any feelings for him, but I just can't close my eyes to it and forget what we did. That's what I was thinking when he walked into my office this afternoon. I was preparing exam materials, and he helped me finish the work in half an hour. After I thanked him, he simply stated that he was going to lock the door. What was wrong with me that I couldn't stop him? I just stood there and watched as he closed and locked the door. When it was over, I grabbed my clothes and ran to the bathroom. I locked the door and got dressed, crying. How could I let this happen? Anthony was dressed and gone when I finally came out of the bathroom. Everything in the office was the same as before this happened. I spent the rest of the day at my desk with the door closed, alternating between tears and thoughts, trying to understand how this happened. Perhaps I should consider seeing a therapist. As Patrick read this entry, he saw that Glenda did feel genuine regret and upset but could not find an excuse for what happened, an act in which she clearly took part of her own free will. His heart grew darker as he read, and the words had a very negative effect on his usually generous and happy personality. The Patrick who began to emerge was not the person his friends, family, or even Glenda would know. December 7th. Dear Diary. Anthony came into the office this morning to say goodbye. He is flying home for the holidays after his exam tomorrow. He wanted to know if I should ask him to come back early so he could come to the seminar with me. I told him to think about it because I haven't made a decision yet. He smiled and said that he would call me in a few days at the office. December 8th. Dear Diary. Today I told Patrick that I wanted him to stay home while I was at the seminar. We could go on a cruise during spring break. We've already discussed the possibility of a cruise, so this is not a new idea. He wasn't happy about it but eventually agreed to stay home. I feel terrible lying to him about the trip. I haven't decided whether to take Anthony with me yet, but I think I want to keep the option open. I've thought about our romance many times on the couch in my office. I don't understand why I'm considering this possibility. I'm so happy with Patrick and our life together. I never think of Anthony in terms other than as a bed partner. There is no love here. It would be nice to spend some time with him without rushing, as he is definitely an experienced lover. I wonder if he will call me or forget about this idea. December 12th. Dear Diary. Anthony called me at the office this morning. He still wants me to take him to Columbus. He suggested that I call there and book 2 adjoining rooms so that no one would ever see us entering the same room. His idea of describing him as my brother and booking the room in his name seems perfect. He said he would call again tomorrow to see if I made a reservation, and if so, he would call them to pay for my room with his credit card. Now I need to decide if I'm going to knowingly cheat on Patrick. December 14th. Dear Diary. Anthony called again today. Apparently, he tried to contact me yesterday, but I wasn't in the office. I actually called and made a reservation, as he suggested. I felt terrible doing this. We were given numbers 412 and 414. Today, he is going to call and pay for number 414 with his Visa card. He sounds excited. I can't say I'm really excited, but I think I'm looking forward to it. Anthony will leave at the end of the spring semester and is no longer participating in the assistantship program. I hope I won't be tempted to date him again after our 3 nights at the Sheraton. I don't know what it is about Anthony that captivates me so much. Many handsome men used to look at me, but I never gave in to temptation. I think he's one of those guys who just intuitively knows how to push all the right buttons. At least, that's how it is with me. God, I hope Patrick never finds out about this. It will kill him. He doesn't deserve this at all. There were several entries for the rest of December, but only one of them mentioned Anthony or the plan he and Glenda had hatched to spend 3 nights at the Sheraton. Apparently, he called her at home 2 days after Christmas. December 28th. Dear Diary. Anthony called me at home yesterday. I was shocked to hear his voice, but I was also grateful that Patrick was at work. Anthony said he was prepared for a man to answer and would have asked for a girl named Veronica if that had happened. He said he just wanted to make sure I was still going to do it, since he would have to come back for New Year's if he was going with me. I told him I was taking him with me, and he got really excited. I tried to sound calm, but inside I had to admit that I was worried too. I really hope this helps me get rid of it. Before Patrick and I got married, I had never spent 2 nights in a row with the same man. I thought about this, and perhaps that's why I decided to agree with Anthony's proposal to spend this time together. I just pray that it brings out everything that's inside of me. Patrick looked at his watch and saw that it was almost 5 a.m. He knew the next entry was the one he had read first, just moments after opening the diary. He had almost finished the last book of Glenda's diaries but had already decided that he had to read them all. Even though what he read suggested that she had never cheated on him before, he had to know for sure. He wanted to know if there was someone else he could direct his anger toward. He already knew that he had a lot to do today, so before finishing the last page, he returned to the kitchen to make coffee. Time for bed would come later. When he returned to the living room with a cup of fresh coffee, he read the last page of the book again. January 3rd. Dear Diary. Well, tomorrow is the big day. I'm going to 3 days of workshops and 3 nights of intim with Anthony. I'll pick him up before I leave town, and I guess I'll drop him off at his house on the way back. Thank God Patrick didn't seriously try to convince me to take him on this trip. I really don't know what I would have said to him if he had. Patrick found a map for me on the internet so I wouldn't get lost along the way. This afternoon, while he was at work, I checked online and found that there was a Victoria's Secret store in the mall next to the Sheraton. I think I'll buy some really pretty outfits for Anthony and then wash them before I come back to wear them for Patrick. I don't really like the idea, but he'll never know. I can't believe I'm so excited about this trip. I also wonder if Anthony expects me to do something that Patrick and I have never tried. I'm not sure I would want this to happen, as it would be difficult to offer Patrick anything new. He might wonder where I got the idea from. Perhaps if this happens, I'll save everything I learned for our cruise, since I can always say I just decided to be adventurous. I've already started packing my things, and I hope Patrick doesn't think it's suspicious. The last thing I want is to make him suspicious. I just reread all my thoughts for today, and I'm wondering if I can actually do this. What happened in my office was very spontaneous. If Anthony and I spend even 1 night together on this trip, it will be planned well in advance. There is no way I can justify this, even to myself, as a moment of weakness. I guess I can also tell Anthony I'm refusing and pay for his room and travel expenses. Patrick finished the 7th journal and sat sipping his coffee, thinking about all the details he had been reading for the past 9 hours. As he sat there, he began to formulate a plan that he could work on over the next 3 days. He had already decided that his marriage was over. Even if she reneges on her agreement with Anthony, he will never be able to trust her again. Even the thought of forgiveness seemed hopelessly unrealistic. As time passed, he felt his love for Glenda drain away and his hatred for Anthony grow exponentially. Just before noon, Patrick got up from his computer and went to get his cordless phone. As soon as he took it out, he sat down at the computer again and dialed the number from the screen. "Peep Investments, how can I help you?" The woman who answered the phone sounded very businesslike, and Patrick noticed it immediately. "Do you handle divorce cases?" Patrick wasn't sure what to call what he wanted to do, but he assumed it was usually related to divorces. "If you mean, do we take photos of cheating spouses and things like that, then yes." "Do you want to talk to a detective?" The woman's professionalism reassured him. "Yes, I would like to talk to someone. This is exactly the kind of work I need done." The phone switched to soft rock radio as Patrick waited almost 30 seconds before the detective answered the call. "John Peep speaking. As I understand, you need evidence for a divorce. How can I help?" The man also sounded very businesslike, and Patrick immediately began telling him his story. "Well, I think my wife is cheating on me with a man at the Sheraton Hotel near the airport. I would like to know if you can provide photographic evidence and how much it would cost." Patrick wasn't too sure exactly what he needed to know or how to phrase his request. "Sheraton Hotel, understood. We can arrange this. Is this happening now? What time frame are we talking about?" Patrick felt comfortable and replied, "My wife is there now. She will stay until Saturday morning. She's in room 412, and the man she's dating is in 414. These are adjacent rooms. They were there last night, but I didn't decide what to do until this morning. My wife is attending a series of seminars, and the person she's dating just joined her." He wondered if the detective would catch the unintentional pun. John Peep must have gotten the joke because he laughed quietly before saying, "I'll need a few extra details, and I'd like to know what kind of surveillance you need first. Could you provide their names and descriptions?" Patrick described his wife and offered to email a photo if necessary. He had found the company's website but didn't want to waste time emailing. He also provided Anthony's full name and gave a vague description from his wife's diary. "It's quite simple, Mr. Dunn. We can install cameras in their rooms this afternoon and leave them there until the weekend after they check out. It only takes a few minutes to install the hardware, and I just checked my Sheraton files. We have a contact person who will allow us to enter the rooms for a fixed fee per entry. If you do not need to monitor them constantly, you won't have to pay an hourly fee for our services. I think the $1,800 flat fee will cover everything if you only need photographic evidence. You mentioned cameras. Would it be much cheaper with just one camera? I just need confirmation that they were together. In fact, I'd like to have everything done tonight. If there are photographs to prove they spent the night together, I would like to have them by tomorrow evening," Patrick said, still figuring out the details as he went. "We don't know which room they're using, so we'll have to install cameras in both. The cost is reasonable, considering the high quality of the equipment used and the expenses involved, like paying a maintenance person to enter 2 rooms twice, once to install the equipment and once to remove it, which will cost $100. "Sorry, I didn't think about that. I've never done this before. I assume you'll want to pay in advance? I can pay by credit card on your site, if that's appropriate." Patrick was now determined to make things work. The man he was talking to seemed like a professional, and he didn't want to travel far to meet him in person. Using the website will be fine. When filling out the form, use case number 1372A. This will help our accountants keep everything in order. As soon as I see your payment, I'll immediately go install the cameras. We'll create a DVD with what we record on the cameras. I will need your name and address for shipping." That seemed simple enough to Patrick, but mailing the DVD wouldn't help him much. "Could you just keep the DVD until I contact you? What I need now are photos to confirm they actually met there. I don't want anything explicit, just pictures that clearly show they're cheating. You could email them to me tomorrow, and I'll print them here. You're the boss, Mr. Dunn. I can easily take photos from video streams. The DVD will remain on file until you request it." Patrick provided his phone number and paid by credit card while they remained on the line. After confirmation of payment, the detective promised to immediately begin installing the cameras. Satisfied with his agreement with the private investigator, Patrick finally succumbed to the lack of sleep he had been enduring. He stretched out on the sofa and soon fell asleep. By late afternoon, he awoke somewhat refreshed, but definitely hungry. After eating the warmed pizza, he returned to his chair, opened the first of the 6 completed diaries, and began to read. It went much faster now because he didn't have to reread anything or spend much time thinking about the content. He had just finished the first volume and stood up to stretch his legs when Glenda called a little before 10 p.m. He felt surprisingly comfortable talking to her, and neither of them hinted at the fact that they had secrets. After he hung up, he thought that she was probably as good at hiding her intentions as he was. Now that he had a plan, it was easier to do what he needed to do. As he thought about it, he wondered if he could ever feel normal again. Before starting the second volume, he went over his plans again. On Friday, he would need to take care of the details, especially visiting his bank and making financial arrangements. He had already called Anderson Electric to quit and was due to pick up his last check sometime the next day. It was past 1 a.m. when he finally finished the second volume. Reading it took much longer than the first because he realized that it was quite possible, even probable, that while he sat there reading, Glenda was in bed with Anthony at the Sheraton Hotel. His thoughts constantly wandered from the written pages to the restless scenes playing out in his imagination. Patrick was very tired by this point and finally decided to get a few more hours of sleep if he could. He knew he wouldn't be able to sleep in the bed he and Glenda always shared, so he stretched out on the couch again. Surprisingly, he was able to fall asleep and woke up around 7 in the morning, feeling rested. After a quick breakfast, he began reading again, starting with the third volume. By midday, he had finished volumes 3 and 4 and was able to set the journals aside while he worked on his to-do list. The first thing he did was visit Anderson Electric to pick up his last check and clean out his locker. The owner, Gus Anderson, tried to persuade him to change his mind, as he hated losing his best employee. After Patrick explained his situation a bit, Gus realized his pleas would get him nowhere and reluctantly shook Patrick's hand, wishing him luck. He managed to get Patrick to promise to return to Anderson Electric in the future, if possible. His trip to the bank took a little longer, as there was a lot of paperwork. When he was finally able to leave, he had a bag containing more than $2,000, the entire amount he could withdraw from his joint and personal accounts. He had hoped for more, but additional funds would require Glenda's signature. The money he was able to withdraw was meant to cover his current needs. It was almost 4 p.m. when he returned home, and the first thing he did was check his answering machine. There was a message from Peep Investigations, and after gathering his courage, he dialed the direct line to John Peep. John Peep speaking. How can I help? This is Patrick Dunn calling you back. Were you able to install the cameras and get any results? Oh yes, Mr. Dunn. We installed cameras in both rooms yesterday afternoon and captured results around noon today. Both rooms were empty when we entered, so it went very quickly. Patrick hesitated before asking, was there anything on the tape? He almost held his breath as he waited for John Peep's answer. Well, Patrick, this is never easy for me to say, but your suspicions have been confirmed. We have all the evidence you need for your divorce. They spent the night in your wife's room. I've transferred the footage to DVD, and it's here for you whenever you want to pick it up. You mentioned you wanted 3 stills from the video, and I have them ready to email if you still want that. The information brought tears to Patrick's eyes, which surprised him. Despite everything he had read, knowing that visual evidence existed somehow turned the situation from possible fiction to harsh reality. Yes, please email me the photos. Thank you very much, Mr. Peep. If everything is paid in full, I believe our business is concluded. Yes, your payment completely covers the bill. Are you sure everything is okay? Your voice sounds a little different than yesterday. I know there's often a lot of emotional pain involved in these situations, and to be honest, I'm a little concerned. Patrick had mastered his emotions, but there was a certain edge to his voice when he said, I'm fine, thank you. I'll be sure to let you know if I need anything else. Well, I'm sure your lawyer will want a copy of the DVD if you decide to file for divorce on the grounds of infidelity. In any case, We will keep it on file for a year or until we receive your instructions. You know, many of my clients have told me that therapy can help in such situations. This isn't my area of expertise, but I understand that information like the DVD I have here often takes a real toll on the injured party, and a good therapist can help you deal with that. Please don't worry about me, Mr. Peep. I know what I need to do to get through this. Thank you for your professional help. Patrick hung up before John Peep could say anything else. His face was now a mask, hiding any emotions, no matter what they were. He was still sitting in the kitchen when he heard the computer beep, signaling the arrival of an email. He walked quietly into the room where the computer was and opened the email from Peep Investigations. After looking at the 3 attached photographs, he sent them to be printed on a printer loaded with 8x10 photo paper. A few minutes later, he held in his hands physical evidence of his wife's infidelity. As requested, none of the photos were explicit. After one last close look at the photographs, Patrick placed all 3 in a brown envelope that was waiting for him on the table. Leaving the envelope on the kitchen table, he returned to the chair in which he had spent most of the last 2 days and picked up the 5th diary. Just before midnight, Patrick finished the last 2 volumes of Glenda's diaries. As he sat there thinking about all 6 volumes, he realized how closely Glenda had always matched his expectations of her. There were very few surprises in the pages of those 6 books. There was no indication that she had ever even thought about betraying him. He learned many little secrets about her, things that helped him understand certain situations that had arisen in their past. He also discovered that she was more insecure than he had realized, as many of the entries showed her lack of self-confidence. One thing that stood out was her obvious deep love for him, which made her actions with Anthony even more incomprehensible to Patrick. The real surprise for him was that their meeting at that birthday party many years ago was not accidental. He learned that when someone casually mentioned that the birthday boy knew Patrick, Glenda became excited at the thought of meeting him again. At her request, she was invited to the party, and the rest was history. Reading the 2 volumes kept him so busy that he didn't even notice that Glenda had not called, and that he was now very hungry. As he prepared a sandwich and a drink, his mind was completely occupied with memories of Glenda and Anthony, replaying their roles from the night before. His thoughts remained dark, strengthening his determination to carry out his plans. Whether it was the late dinner or the 8x10 photos of Glenda and Anthony appearing before his eyes every time he closed them, he slept restlessly that night. A little after 7 in the morning, he gave up trying to sleep again and got up to start the day he had been preparing for over the last 2 days. He had a lot to do and decided to start early. At 8:30 a.m., he called his only close relative, his brother Samuel. They weren't exactly at odds, but they rarely saw each other outside of the obligatory Christmas visit. It had been just 2 weeks since Samuel, his wife Mary, and their 2 children, Sam, 12, and Brenda, 10, had visited him. Patrick noticed that his brother was surprised to hear that he was going to come over for a short visit that morning. Luckily, Samuel and his family had no other plans. Patrick managed to stay busy until he arrived at his brother's house a little after 10 a.m. Knowing that the children would be eager to return to their activities, Patrick called them into the kitchen, where he sat at the table with his brother while Mary made fresh coffee. He knew the family planned to visit Disneyland during spring break, so he gave each of the children a new $100 bill for pocket money. They were delighted with the gift and thanked him profusely, hugging him. "You didn't have to do that, Patrick," Samuel said. "But it was very nice of you to make their day like that. What's happened? Did you win the Powerball lottery?" Patrick forced a small smile and said, "No, that's not it. My luck isn't that great. I just felt generous." The 3 of them were sitting at the kitchen table with their coffee, making small talk. Finally, Mary said, "I don't think there's any need to avoid talking about the big plans you and Glenda have. She told me you're going to have children. I know you'll enjoy having kids around as much as we do." Patrick paused for a moment before responding. "She told you about it, huh? I don't think there are many things that women don't talk to each other about." Before Mary could say anything else, Patrick continued, "It's hard to say how our plans will pan out. A lot can stand in the way of such decisions." He effectively changed the subject by turning to his brother and asking him a couple of questions about his job as a restaurant manager. A few minutes after they finished their coffee, Patrick stood up to leave. "In case I don't see you until next Christmas, "I hope everything goes well," he said, quickly shaking his brother's hand before turning and giving Mary a brief hug. "I'll be thinking about you," he added, and then turned and left. The three of them exchanged goodbyes as he walked to his car. As he drove away, Samuel turned to Mary and said, "I wonder what that was about." He seemed to have something on his mind, but didn't look like he wanted to talk about it. Mary didn't think there was anything unusual about it and replied, "Patrick is probably just killing time until Glenda gets back from the course she signed up for. I seem to remember she said she'd be gone until the evening." They held hands and walked back into the house, discussing their plans for the rest of the day. Just before 6 p.m., Glenda Dunn drove up to her house. She was a little surprised to see that Patrick's car was gone and quickly entered the house through the side door into the kitchen. She had premeditated her first meeting with her husband after returning home and was a little confused that he wasn't there, only silence answering her call as she entered. The fact that she had come home to an empty house was not part of her plans. In a way, she realized this might be a good thing, as it would give her time to unpack and put the clothes from her suitcase into the washing machine. She was already planning to take another shower, unsure if the morning shower had completely washed away all traces of Anthony. As she walked past the kitchen table, she noticed a piece of paper in the center, weighed down by a salt shaker. Realizing it must be from Patrick, she took it. "Glenda. Gus called me from the office this morning. He was stuck without a senior foreman for some urgent work at the Ville Center, and I agreed to help him. The overtime will come in handy. I'll be back tomorrow afternoon. Patrick." Glenda was slightly unhappy about the note, although it did give her time to do whatever she wanted before seeing her husband for the first time since the trip. She placed the note on the kitchen counter and took her suitcase upstairs to put everything in the wash. She had already decided that instead of a shower, she would take a nice long hot bath. After transferring the clothes that needed washing into the laundry basket, she was carrying it towards the bedroom door when she noticed her diary on top of the tall dresser. She immediately remembered that she had left it with the emergency bag on Wednesday and picked it up to take it downstairs. She was relieved to see that it was where she had left it, untouched. She had intended to update her diary during the trip but hadn't been able to because she had forgotten it. She realized where it was when Patrick told her where the emergency bag was and clearly remembered putting both items there. Apparently, Patrick had put the bag back on the shelf but left her diary where it was. She decided to catch up on her diary while doing the laundry since it was too early to relax in the bath. While the washing machine worked on the last traces of Anthony from her clothes, Glenda made herself a sandwich and a bowl of soup. When she finished lunch, she put the dirty dishes in the sink and went to the phone, pressing Patrick's speed dial button. It rang twice before she realized the sound of a ringing cell phone was coming from the basket on the kitchen counter. The basket was used by both of them to store keys, cell phones, and sometimes a wallet or spare change. After hanging up, she walked over to the counter and took Patrick's cell phone from the basket. "Crap. How can I contact you now?" It was strictly a rhetorical question, and after she asked it, she returned to the kitchen table and placed the diary in front of her. The small brass key that opened the diary was in her wallet, attached to a piece of red yarn. She quickly used it to open the lock, and after removing the lock, she opened the book to the first blank page, took a pen, and began to write. January 7th. Dear Diary. The most intense 4 days of my life have ended, and I hope I can remember everything I wanted to tell you. Some things will be unpleasant to write down, but I have to do it. When I picked Anthony up at his house, it was obvious he was looking forward to the trip. He kept trying to touch me during the ride, and it irritated me a little. He finally left me alone when we got onto the highway after I warned him that someone I knew might see us. The farther we drove from the city, the more relaxed I became, and I began to enjoy his attention. When we finally arrived, we stopped at the mall before heading to the Sheraton, and while he went to the pill store, I went to Victoria's Secret to find some intimate lingerie. He must have been running back and forth because he joined me in the store before I could buy anything. He made several suggestions, and I finally bought one set that he liked and two that I chose. The one he wanted me to buy was a little tacky, in my opinion. I wore it for him on Wednesday night, and he doesn't know it, but I wrapped it in an empty bag and left it in the trash when we checked out this morning. There was no way I could have worn it for Patrick, especially knowing Anthony had picked it out. I also decided to throw away 2 sets that I bought because I didn't want anything to remind me of our nights at the Sheraton. I know I can't erase all the memories, but I'll try. On Wednesday evening, Anthony joined me in my room. Thursday night was similar to the previous night, except that I started thinking about Patrick. I finally realized after that first night that there is a huge difference between intimate and love. On Thursday night, I told Anthony that was it. The novelty I enjoyed the first night quickly wore off, and I began to realize how much I preferred making love to my husband. I didn't want to start a fight with Anthony, so I didn't tell him anything until we were about to go to bed. He got very angry, and for a while, I was even a little afraid of him. Since it was late, we agreed to stop arguing and both fell asleep pretty quickly, although I was already starting to make plans on how I would make it up to Patrick. On Friday morning, I spoke to Anthony through the locked door and told him not to plan on coming to my room again. He said it was fine and that he would find another partner for Friday night. He added that I wasn't the only cute female sociology professor staying at the hotel. Indeed, after our final dinner, I saw Anthony with one of the women who had attended several sessions with me. I know she's married, but she was just as into Anthony as I had been. You can't imagine how relieved I was when I realized I wouldn't have to argue with him about intimate on Friday night. As I lay in bed that night, I began to realize that Anthony was a predator, targeting older women whom he could manipulate. I am ashamed to admit that I was one of those he managed to control. I was afraid the ride home with him would be unbearable, but it actually went pretty well. Now that I could see Anthony for who he really was, I remained calm during our conversations. He seemed to have had enough night, as he behaved decently. He didn't argue much when I told him I didn't want to see him again. I think he realized he couldn't control me anymore. I had a lot of time to think on the way home, and I had already decided that on Monday morning, I would make an appointment with a psychiatrist or psychologist. I need to make sure I never cheat on Patrick again, and to do that, I have to understand how Anthony managed to get the better of me. I need to address this and control or eliminate this obvious flaw in my character. I would rather die than give in to such temptation again. I also decided to dedicate the rest of my life to making amends with Patrick, even if he never finds out why. It's enough that I carry this terrible secret. I can only pray that he never learns the truth. There's one more decision I've made. If Patrick agrees, I will stop taking the pills when my current prescription runs out in 12 days. The prospect of having children has started to excite me, and there's no point in waiting any longer. When Glenda finished writing her long entry, she used her pen as a bookmark, left the diary on the table, and went upstairs to prepare her bath. She took a cordless phone with her in case Patrick called. Once the bath was filled to the desired level, she added some bath oil, lit the candles, and immersed herself in the water. Lying there, she finally closed her eyes and let the warm water relax her. She was so relaxed that she almost fell asleep, but then she had a strange sensation as if she were being watched. Slowly, she opened her eyes and turned her head toward the bedroom, but no one was there. She went back to relaxing and continued thinking about how to make up for her foolish affair with Anthony. An hour later, she returned to the kitchen feeling refreshed. After switching the clothes to the dryer, she sat back at the kitchen table to reread her latest journal entry. She was momentarily confused when she noticed that the pen was missing from the book. She was sure she had left it between the pages but quickly realized her mistake when she saw it on the kitchen counter, next to a wicker basket. Picking up the pen, she opened the diary and began to read. On Sunday morning, Glenda woke up refreshed and ready for the next stage of her life. After cleaning the house in the morning, she showered and changed into an outfit she knew Patrick liked. By noon, she was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, a large roast beef just starting to cook in the oven. Her peaceful afternoon was interrupted by a knock on the side door. She was both surprised and concerned to see 2 large men at the door. One was a young uniformed policeman, standing slightly to the side with his hand on the handle of his holstered pistol. The second man was older, wearing a suit and coat, and holding his police ID in front of him. "I'm Detective Rankin, and this is Officer Reynolds. We're from the Springfield Police Department, and we're looking for Patrick Dunn. Can you tell us if he's home?" Relief was evident on Glenda's face as she quickly said, "Patrick is at work right now. The moment I saw you, I was afraid something had happened to him. I'm his wife, by the way. Maybe I can help you?" The two men exchanged quick glances before the detective said, "Maybe we better go inside. It's a little chilly out here." Glenda stepped away from the door and said, "Of course, come in." She led the two men into the kitchen before continuing, "Why are you looking for Patrick? What could the police want with him? He never gets into trouble." The detective responded, "We received a call this morning reporting a homicide. The call was recorded, and the number from which it was made was traced to your husband's phone. We are now working with his carrier to determine where he was when the call was made." Relief returned to Glenda's face as she said, "Well, obviously there's been a mistake. I tried to call my husband last night when I got home, but his phone was left here at home. It's in that basket over there." She pointed to a wicker basket on the kitchen counter. Skepticism was clearly visible on the detective's face as he said, "Can I check the phone?" With that, he walked over to the basket and examined it for a few moments before picking it up and returning to the kitchen table. "I don't see any phone here, Mrs. Dunn. Are you sure you're not confusing it with another day?" Shock registered on Glenda's face as she realized the basket was indeed empty. She quickly walked over to the counter and looked around, even though it was obvious that there was nothing else on it. "I don't understand. His phone was here when I tried to call him last night," she said, looking between the officer and the detective, clearly upset and worried. "Well, I can't explain why the phone isn't where you say it should be, Mrs. Dunn. But I have to believe that the call traced to your husband's phone was actually made from it." The detective opened his briefcase and took a few notes before continuing, "Does your husband know a Mr. Anthony Romano?" At the mention of the name, Glenda was even more surprised, and her face went white for a moment before she said, "I know Anthony Romano, but my husband doesn't. Anthony was my teaching assistant last semester." The men exchanged glances again before the detective said, "So there's no reason your husband would have anything against Mr. Romano? Are you sure he didn't know him?" Glenda looked panicked as she replied, "No. Patrick never met Anthony." The detective took a few more notes before looking at her and saying, "Well, your husband seemed to know Mr. Romano well enough to report his murder." Glenda was so shocked by this statement that she sat down at the table, stammering, "Anthony is dead? He was on the trip with me. I dropped him off at his house around 5:30 last night. How could he be dead?" Detective Rankin sat at the opposite end of the table before asking, "What was your relationship with Mr. Romano? Could it have given your husband a reason to kill him?" Glenda's face paled as she replied, "Anthony was just an older student who worked as my teaching assistant. There was no reason for my husband to do anything to him." Although she said this, her tone was unconvincing. The detective gave her a few seconds of uncomfortable silence before continuing, "When we arrived at the address your husband provided, we found evidence that Mr. Romano had been attacked at the entrance to his home. In the hallway, we found a travel bag and signs of a struggle." Glenda began to cry quietly as the detective described the scene at Anthony's house. "The estimated time of death was between 6 and 8 p.m. yesterday," he said. Glenda interrupted, "Patrick would never do that to anyone. He's not like that." Her tears had almost stopped, but it was clear that she was more angry than upset now. The detective checked his notes again before saying, "According to state records, your husband is licensed to carry a .25 caliber semi-automatic pistol. One of the bullets that struck Mr. Romano was recovered from a chair to which he had been tied. Our technicians have tentatively determined that it was a .25 caliber round. The question of motive still remains." Detective Rankin pulled 3 photocopies from his briefcase and placed them on the table in front of Glenda. "These are copies of 3 photographs found at the crime scene. Their location on the table next to Mr. Romano indicates that he was shown these photographs before his death. I don't think you've been completely honest with me about your relationship with Anthony Romano or your husband's interest in him." Glenda picked up the photocopies and looked at them in shock. As the detective spoke, she realized what the photos depicted and began to cry even harder. "No. Patrick couldn't have known," she sobbed. The detective was about to continue when his cell phone rang. He said very little during the 3-minute conversation, mostly jotting down notes. As he wrote, Glenda grew quieter, sitting with her hands covering her face and crying softly. When the call ended, the detective looked at Glenda and said, "Your husband's call was made from Windsor, Ontario. Local police there worked with the telecom provider and found his phone. It was inside a cloth bag, along with his credit cards and a .25 caliber pistol registered to him. The bag was found in a trash bin in the Walmart parking lot. There was no sign of him or his car, though his car's license plates were also found in the trash. Authorities believe he may have stolen plates from another vehicle in the lot to blend in with Ontario traffic. This news offered no comfort to Glenda, who continued to cry inconsolably as she sat at the table. After they had watched her for a few minutes, the detective pulled out another photocopy from his case and placed it in front of her. It was an image of a small brass key with a ruler next to it. There's a small key in the photographs. We don't know its significance. Do you recognize it? Glenda looked at the photo and immediately grabbed her wallet. After a few seconds, she pulled out the diary key from her wallet and held it next to the photo of its identical counterpart. At that moment, she completely lost her composure and sank into a chair, exhausted. The only words that could be made out were diary and Patrick. The two men stayed with Glenda for almost 15 minutes, waiting for her to calm down. They convinced her to call someone to come be with her. When it was confirmed that her sister would arrive within a few minutes, they finally left. As Officer Reynolds walked toward their cars, he asked, "Do you think he'll be caught quickly?" "It all depends on how well he can hide in the next couple of weeks. He hasn't committed any crimes in Canada, so I don't know how actively the local police will pursue him. He's not a serial killer. If he can keep a low profile, the longer he stays free, the less likely he is to be caught. If he's still at large in 6 months, we may have to request television coverage of the case. Some of these most wanted shows do well." Officer Reynolds considered the detective's answer for a few seconds before asking another question. "What do you think is wrong with her story about the cell phone? It seemed like she genuinely believed the phone was there yesterday." "Yes, I agree. I don't think she was lying or confused. I suspect he returned home, but for some reason, didn't follow through with whatever he intended to do. While he was there, he probably saw the phone and decided to take it with him." The young officer looked puzzled and asked, "Well, if he was home, why didn't he let her know? It seems strange to come back just for the phone." Detective Rankin stopped and looked at the junior officer, saying, "Think about it. Patrick Dunn has just killed her lover and returned home. The only reason I can think of for him to come back is to kill her too, and maybe himself. I don't know what changed his mind, but I don't believe for a second that he came back just for the phone." Reynolds nodded slowly, considering the detective's words. Finally, he said, "I imagine Mrs. Dunn will eventually realize how close she came to losing her life, and will wonder why it didn't happen. I wonder how she'll cope with that. What do you think of our story today?" In my opinion, Patrick was right to open his wife's diary because he learned a lot of interesting things. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. See you in the comments.